Thank you once again for joining us for this talk too. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys.
Of course. First off, just by show of hands, does anybody know a teacher or educator, as a friend in their group or family member that might be a teacher?
Or just a teacher in general?
Yeah, just teacher.
No, yeah.
Only reason why I asked
Family,
say that again?
Friends, family, yeah.
There you go. I spent some time working as a school psychologist before shifting to the practice. And one thing that I found very interesting, as a school psychologist, you don't spend as much time in the classroom setting, but you do spend time with the kids and, the adults too, who will come in and share their experiences. And if there's one thing that I think we do in American society, we educate on history, right? We talk a lot about what's happened in our society, what's happened in the world, and we talk about it from a very interpersonal aspect. We never talk about the history of ourselves. Never really talk about, the person who we should give so much credit for surviving these times, and that would be your inner child. The kid in you that spent those different birthdays, asking for different gifts on the brighter end of things, and then on the not so brighter side of things, feeling lost, feeling neglected, feeling like you needed a tender touch or a hug from a caretaker. And even though you might have received it on a small level, you were still hit with, well, why didn't you do this thing? Why can't you succeed in school? Why can't you be like Cousin Larry? I think when I talk about education between, what we teach versus who we are and how much more we need that knowledge of self, we can see how that can be devastating, because in history there's always the quote, if you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going, right? And we see how that manifests in society. When our inner child is calling out to us, a lot of times we see that self is juvenile. We see that as someone who wasn't able to survive the times, that your needs are not strong enough to handle what is going through my life right now. And I'm hoping with this discussion, we just take a second to just not only just appreciate, that child in us, but to also honor them on a day-to-day basis. And there are a few ways that you're able to do that. I think first and foremost is by taking heed into the things that do bother us the most, those little irritating things, right? Like why is my boss, yelling at me? Like Dr. Hunter said that, they're not abusive per se, but I get this hint that they don't respect me. And it might not have been something on a grand scale, right? It might have just been, got to bring a spreadsheet and your boss was just already ticked off. But in turn, you're feeling that as the, am I someone that my boss can respect? Is this somebody that really thinks that I'm able to do this? And then the kid in you comes out, right? And that's not something to feel ashamed of. I'd like to think that sometimes when we have the shame of that, right? We then start to think as though we weren't being mature enough. I'd like for us to just take a second to appreciate us recognizing, like, wait a minute, no, I think I'm feeling something here. I'm trying to figure out what is it that the kid in me is trying to say. Do I need a minute to recognize that I feel hurt by this? Let me call that out, take a second, and to also pay attention to those shameful feelings without making yourself feel wrong for having them.
Because the boss could be having his own experience in his mind that has nothing to do with you. It's just triggered him.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And in some ways, your boss might be suppressing their own inner child. They might be having a hard time there. I think the second way of being able to do that also is by creating sort of like a map for yourself. Some people might consider that as journaling, if that's what you prefer, or if you just want to kind of keep a mental note of those times when you're able to sit back and say, wait a minute, I did feel this experience.
Like a mind dump, you're saying? Just
more or less, right. Being able to sort of just pinpoint the signs of self that said, like, okay, this calls back to a time when I was younger,
Right.
where I had this interaction with an uncle, I had this interaction with a family member, and it made me feel embarrassed. It made me feel as though I was incompetent. Perhaps that might be why I'm spending additional time at work trying to make sure that people see that I'm at the top instead of being okay with the bottom, like Dr. Hunter mentioned. And not always trying to aspire for that higher up. You know, sometimes that might be more detrimental to us.
Because it's also sometimes you try to control people's perception of us. So you just build this character and you're so consumed by it.
Right.
That you're not taking a moment to step back and really like think.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Need a moment, yeah.
Absolutely. And then also just not being able to honor who you are as a person.
Yeah, you're not being authentic.
You're not being authentic, and then also on a more compassionate way of framing it, just feeling as though who you are today isn't worthy, or who you are today, like having those upset feelings is not good.
Right.
When in actuality, you know, it's the little one in us calling out for something, calling out for a need.
Yeah.
Need for a friend, a need for comfort.
And then acting out in the process.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, psychotherapy is always a great way of creating that sort of map, being able to speak with a professional that's able to empathize with you, stay objective, work with you, and create those links. The third, which I think is a personal favorite of mine, is staying connected to your hobbies. Or if you don't want to frame it as hobbies, just things that you don't need to make money off of.
Yeah.
Something for fun that brings in the laugh and eliminates the shame and guilt, right? Something that ties you back into honoring the kid. I mean, perhaps you might have had an instance where art was something that you found just total joy. You were able to blank out the whole world and just brush. And then somewhere along the line was another adult whose child is being suppressed, telling you that art is not marketable, telling you that art is stupid. You know? Being able to stay in touch with that is important, especially, you know, with a world that's staying more on top of social media and trying to monetize different things and avenues and skills. Sometimes I can feel pressure packed, like I might have to learn how to do this hobby in order to make residual income, and I would encourage you to think of it more along the lines of how do I do this for me? How do I paint my life in my own colors that don't have to be regulated by rules from people outside? And I think with that brings a sense of self that your child can really appreciate, because you're living life on your own terms.
Yeah.
And it's not so much about what somebody else is projecting onto you. You know, I think we spend so much time trying to run away from that child, and I think I see parallels between that and the education system, and seeing how kids are often told to like grow up.
Yeah.
Be this, right. Be a kid, right? You only get what 18 years of things. You only get so much time, and then even then, you know, how special does it feel to be able to honor the first person, basically the first line of defense in your existence.
Yeah.